Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It's Tom Hadley here. Well, just about afternoon, a minute to 12 just about. We're coming to you a little bit early just to check the sound. So if you can hear us okay, use the little box at the bottom just to say that you're receiving us loud and clear. We'll kick the webinar off in literally a couple of minutes. But do let us know if you can hear. How's the sound? A little bit of a sound check. Thanks a lot. A lot of you joining us here. So this webinar was put on in a matter of days, and we've got, I think, 270 odd registered to take part, which is fantastic. So whilst we're waiting at the end, if you found the webinar useful, do let us know, because it might be something that we replicate over the coming weeks and months. Let's hope not, but it could drag on that long. So we're nearly on 12. In fact, we are bang on 12. So let's start the webinar proper now. I think all of you can hear us, so thanks a lot. And again, thank you for joining us in such numbers. I've got a whole room of colleagues with me here, because obviously the challenges around coronavirus cut across the work we're doing on sectors, obviously our legal support, some of the public affairs work that we're doing, our services to members, so it cuts across all of the REC. So I'll just do a quick intro. I'll let people introduce themselves in the room. Neil, start with you.
Hi, I'm Neil Suchak. I'm one of the policy advisors at the REC, and I work particularly with the health and social care team.
Okay, and I think that sector-specific approach will be something we'll look at further down. Lorraine?
Oh, hi, I'm Lorraine Lyie. I'm the head of legal support at the REC, which means I'm in charge of the legal helpline, and we have been taken, as you can probably imagine, literally hundreds of calls from members this week.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Lorraine. And we'll be giving you a flavour for some of the questions that are coming in as well. And Sophie?
Hi, I'm Sophie Winfield. I'm head of policy and public affairs. So this week we've been finding out from the government what the changes to the budget will mean, and when we will have further details on that.
Yes, and there are definitely some political elements to this. So as we crack on, so this is the agenda that we've got today. So a play in 4 acts. We'll be looking to take stock and looking at the latest steer from government as a starter. What action their industry leaders already taken? So some of the recent meetings we've been in have been a good opportunity to review what's happening on the ground. And again, as well as sending us questions in the box, do send us comments, anecdotes, things that you're seeing on the ground. It really helps us to understand what's happening for you. So do send us any intel, anything you're willing to share. I think that would be great. The third section, we'll just review the guidance. So this is where Lorraine will talk through some of these specific issues, in particular around SSP. And again, great to get your views and questions there. And then we'll conclude just a bit of a looking ahead and taking stock of what this means in the short and longer term for hiring and some of the activities that we've got planned here at the REC. Neil, I think an initial question already.
Well, there's some comments there about the slides being available, so they'll be sent out afterwards to all attendees.
Yes, good point. And again, as with all these webinars, we're expecting quite a lot of questions. We might not be able to get to all of the questions in the next 40 odd minutes, but anything we don't get to, it's useful to get the questions because it will help inform some of the work we're doing with the hub and some of the guidance we'll be doing. So any question we don't get to, apologies in advance for that, but it is useful to hear, you know, the issues that you're facing. So do continue to feed in. So that's the format for the webinar. Again, thank you for joining us in such large numbers. Let's start with this one, hot off the press, taking stock. The budget feels like ages ago, but it was literally just 2 days ago, was it?
2 days.
2 days ago, yes. So there's a few issues that have come out there, and I think, Lorraine, perhaps the number one issue specific to our sector has been around this announcement around the 250 employees and what that means in practice if you're running a recruitment business, a recruitment agency. Yeah.
Yeah, so of course we're aware that the reference to 250 employees and how employees is going to be defined is really important for our members, because we know that a lot of you who supply temporary workers will have fewer than 250 employees internally, but of course quite inflated workforces because of your temporary workers. Unfortunately, the announcement from the budget hasn't clarified that. We do know that there is going to be primary legislation to bring these changes in, and we expect the detail of how employees will be defined within that. But our policy team is also working hard to seek clarification ahead of that.
Yeah, so as soon as we heard that announcement, Sophie and the policy team swung into action, and I think we've got a contact at DWP that we're taking this forward with already.
Yeah, so we've taken this forward with DWP and BASE. At the moment, DWP have contacted us today to say that they're working on an FAQ style approach. So we're going to send all your questions following this webinar. We've already sent questions yesterday that we were starting to get. And so they haven't given us time when they're going to publish that, but that is their urgent priority. They're coordinating with BASE and Public Health England. As soon as it goes live, we will obviously let you know.
Okay. Good. Anything? So we'll come to questions. There's already lots of feedback and questions coming, which is fantastic to see. So we'll pause, perhaps in a few minutes and start looking at those questions. But do keep sending in comments, questions, etc. Some of you are unable to see the slides. I think most people can see them, but do let us know. If they're not coming up, we'll try and address any sort of technical issues that you're facing going forward. Just to close up on the budget, I thought it'd be useful to flag that you can access all the sort of response from us at the link here on the web page, and we'll send that around afterwards. It's interesting to look at how other organisations responded to it, and I think just as a quick summary, positive feedback on things like business rates, some of the support specific around Corona was welcomed by the business community. Elsewhere, there was quite a lot of talk you might have seen around infrastructure investment. So again, if you're in the construction engineering space, that can create new opportunities for us looking ahead. Quite a lot about research and development investments. So again, if you're in the life sciences sector, for example, again, that becomes a source of opportunity. A lot of discussions about regional investment, which we know is a priority for government, is one of the reasons that we're driving so much regional activity here at the REC through the Regions 2025 papers and all the work we're doing in the devolved nations as well. I think overall as well, the feedback is there was quite a pro-business vibe to it, which isn't to be taken for granted in light of where we've come from. In terms of the negatives, the big one for us is obviously around IR35, so we have continued to push for a delay. We've never given up on that, and we think some of the current challenge we face accentuates that need. We'll continue to push, but again, that was, in our view, a missed opportunity. And perhaps the other slight negative other business bodies picked up on as well is around the skills agenda. So if we are going to deliver all these infrastructure projects, etc., where's the real investment in skills? And again, our message has been to drive our position on the apprenticeship levy and extending that and making that into a broader levy that works for temporary and contract staff better than it currently does. So that's a quick wrap up. Before we move on, anything people want to pick up in terms of specific questions? Quite a lot of sector specific issues being raised. Perhaps Neil, one around healthcare and the use of agency staff in healthcare to deal with it. And I know that's an issue that we've been discussing with the RCN and the Department of Health.
Yeah, so Public Health England have got guidance on their website for their overall action plan for coronavirus. This section 7 refers specifically to the use of staff. Currently, certainly as of this morning, it was stating that bank and agency staff should be avoided where possible. I mean, we think, practically speaking, that's very unrealistic to enforce, and we'll be taking that forward to try and have that removed or amended. I mean, clearly in the coming weeks and months, there's going to be an increased demand for agency and bank staff. So we'll take that forward.
Yeah, and that's just one example of sector-specific information that we're trying to impart. There's a lot, certainly in the education sector, we'll perhaps come to as well. And just so we're clear on that, that's really about the duty of care to the worker, but also the perception it's harder to track people who are coming in for temporary work in the healthcare sector. So there is a rationale behind it, but in practice we'll have to see how that one works out. So do keep sending in the questions and comments. But let's move on to the second section now, which is about action and looking at what industry leaders are already doing. And to start this one, we're going to ask you a couple of questions. So again, this whole webinar is largely a listening exercise for us, what's really happening on the ground. So let's start with this first poll question, and we're going to look at both the temporary work contractor market as well as perm. But let's start with the contractor temporary work one. So what has been the impact so far on temporary work and contractor placement? So has the demand for staff actually increased a little? Has it increased considerably? And we'll give you some feedback from some of our recent meetings in some sectors where that has been the case. Has there been no real impact? Has there been a slight decrease or a considerable decrease? So we just want to take a bit of a temperature check on that. So what's been the impact so far? So it'd be really useful to give that. Again, we'll be using our report on jobs data and other things over the coming months to track what's happening. But again, there's a little bit of a lag there, even though it is one of the quickest things you'll get in terms of what's happening in the jobs market. So we thought we'd take a bit of a live temperature check in terms of what's happening. So nearly 70% have voted. If we just wait for a few more to come in, that's great. And that's it. We're over the sort of 70%. A couple still responding. Okay, we'll give you another few seconds. Interestingly, an interesting score actually, sort of nearly half saying no real impact so far. And I think we'll nearly 80%, last little push for 80%. We're just about there, fantastic. We'll close that poll now. So 80% of you responded, and the findings, the main one, which was perhaps slightly surprising, was no real impact. So nearly 50% of you are saying that there was no real impact. A significant minority are actually saying that demand for staff has increased a little. So it'd be interesting to get that sort of feedback, what sectors you're in. But more of you than that are saying that's decreased a little. Okay, so that's the score. So we'll be sending some of this through as we go. So 31% are saying demand for staff has decreased. Only 4% of you are saying has decreased considerably. So that's interesting. And again, if you could give us an insight, certainly for those sectors where it's either increase or decrease, what sectors you're working in, and we'll see how that fits with some of the data we've picked up from members over recent meetings there. So very, very useful feedback. Oh, sorry. I shouldn't have said a temperature check, so apologies about that. Somebody's picked me up on that one. Yes. So thanks, Andrew, for pointing that out. I'll take that on the chin, as Boris would say. Let's move on to the second poll, which is exactly the same, but looking at permanent placement. So again, same question: has demand for staff increased a little, increased considerably? No real impact on the perm market. Has it decreased or decreased considerably? So again, looking at what's currently happening in the perm market. We picked up some quite interesting information from our events over the last few weeks in Birmingham, in Edinburgh, in particular around how candidates are responding as well as the end users. So it'd be great to get your views on that, on what's happening out there in the perm market. Again, the report on jobs that we do will give us some really good insight into what's happening. But this today is almost a bit of a precursor to that. So thanks a lot for responding. Nearly 80% again, which is fantastic. And again, the picture, most people no real impact so far, which is encouraging. And we'll just leave it there, and we'll close that now, Temi. Great stuff. Okay, so there the feedback is 60% no real impact. Okay, some are saying it's increased a little. Okay, nobody's saying it's decreased considerably. That's perhaps no surprise. And 28% saying it's decreased a little. Again, that fits with the feedback we've had from events where employers are putting things on hold to some extent. There has been an impact, some members have said, on fluidity, so perhaps candidates themselves not going through with a job offer because of the relative uncertainty that's out there. And then 9% saying it's decreased considerably. Again, if you can give us a flavour for that, what sectors in particular you're seeing affected for the perm side, that would be really interesting. So thanks very much for that feedback. And final poll question for this section is, what are your current priorities? So on this one, you can choose 3. So 3 answers. So your top 3 basically, and we're conscious that there's a mix of all of these, but do give us your answer on that. So has it been around ensuring well-being of staff and the workers on your books, accessing the latest information to keep people updated, understanding legal issues in particular around SSP, maintaining service levels to clients, or this idea of scenario planning, so looking at the short, mid-term, looking ahead, maybe changing business plans, etc. So we're looking for a top 3 here, and again, conscious it's probably a mix of all 5, but what were the top 3 within those 5? If there's something that's not on this list that's been a massive priority for you, do drop that into the box, because that's really useful again for our own planning and our own intelligence. Okay, so keep filling that on with nearly 50% already. This one will give you a little bit more time on, because I'm conscious it's three scenarios you can put in there, so it takes a little bit more time to think about. The clear front runner, though, is ensuring well-being of staff and workers, which is extremely encouraging and totally fits with the feedback we've had from all the member events and webinars we've been doing over the last few weeks. So that is very, very interesting. Accessing information, that's coming up as second. So it's a fair mix spread across, but I think there's a clear front runner, which is the well-being of staff and workers, which again is really good to see. So leave that just for a couple of minutes. 85% voted, fantastic. We'll close that one there. So that is the finding. So 86% of you saying that putting staff and workers front and centre has been the priority. 64% access to information. So again, there's so much information out there. I think one of the challenges for members is knowing what to send around and being a trusted source for workers. That's certainly being a theme of recent meetings. Understanding the legal issues, so the rest is pretty much a decent spread across. Again, if there's things on that list or there are things that are not on that list and that you're doing, do let us know. So it's really an opportunity for us to understand how you're approaching some of these challenges going ahead. So fantastic feedback. Thanks a lot for that. This is just a very quick wrap up of some of the recent meetings, and I wanted to do this after the poll, but this is the feedback we've been getting from member meetings over the last month or so. So this idea of industry leaders adopting a people-first approach. We did a white paper, when was it, Neil? About a year ago, on leadership and what does a future leader look like, and there were 2 big things that came out of that. One was future leaders as being able to deal with disruption. Now, we weren't planning on it being around a virus, but there was a definite theme about that. So dealing with a crisis, that was a big hallmark of a good 21st century leader. And the other one was about putting people first. And I think what's happening at the current time is demonstrating some really good leadership within the sector. So that's encouraging to see. Regular updates and briefings for staff. Testing work from home arrangements, we'll ask a little bit more about that, but that's been one of the themes across many sectors. So how do we do that in practice? Reviewing practical things like travel protocols. So a number of our members are saying that's been a priority for them. What staff are the most at risk? And I guess that must come on the legal outline, perhaps to some extent, Lorraine. So pregnant women, people with health conditions. Is that something that's been coming at you?
Yeah, so certainly we have had a lot of questions from members who have concerns about their workforce, who fall into the at-risk categories. So those with underlying health issues in particular, perhaps some of their older workers, and what measures they need to take to protect them. And there does seem to be quite a lot of interest in encouraging working from home where it's possible to do.
Yeah, okay, interesting. And we'll ask your views on that further down the line. And also some of the members said we have been looking at our process for external visitors, attending external meetings, etc. So that's just some of the areas that our members have been focusing on. And then there's another wave of priorities for members that we picked up, which is more the external facing things. And just to go through these and see if these resonate with you. So really being close to your clients and agreeing common protocols and approaches. Some client requests are pretty onerous, actually. So in Birmingham and Scotland, and I think the meeting in Bristol a few weeks ago, people saying we want to know where all temporary staff had been in the last 6 months, I think was one extreme case. So clients are raising the bar quite high in terms of the reassurance they're looking for from their agency. Interesting in your views on that, and if that's something you're seeing as well. What are the cost implications linked to SSP in particular? So we'll talk about that further down the line, but we know that's a priority. Cash flow, big challenge always for our sector. Trying to maintain a focus on that whilst everybody's thinking about other things like well-being, quite rightly, but maintaining a focus on chasing down debt and managing cash flow. That's a priority for members. Scenario planning, so we touched on that in the previous question, but both looking at the short and longer term and looking at specific challenges and opportunities in sectors. And Sophie, I think the last policy committee we had, we agreed afterwards actually people were quite upbeat, and certainly some of the sectors there seem to be seeing a huge demand for staff.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a difference between different sectors, but yeah, generally speaking, at the moment there seemed to be a positive feeling. Logistics was obviously one of those sectors that had also seen an increase in recent weeks.
Yeah, and I think the other opportunity comes with our members recognising that the way you respond to a crisis, by getting closer to your clients, by providing the best possible service, is something that people remember you for. So I think that's definitely something that's front of mind for many of our members. Let's use this opportunity to really show what we're about and how we can help our clients and candidates as well as staff. So that's been encouraging to see in all the meetings that we've done. So let's move on to another poll question, which is specific to the work from home agenda. So lots of blogs, tweets going out about this, how you do it in practice. So just choose one of these answers. So just interested, just take your views on this. So yes, a significant number are already working remotely. So you've already put plans in place and are implementing it. So you're starting to have to manage a more remote workforce. Is it the case that you've got plans in place, but they're not yet implemented? So you've done the groundwork, you've got things figured out, but you haven't really pressed the button yet. Or third option, we're not really planning to change our working patterns much at all at the moment. So three options there, just a quick sense check on that one. And again, there's quite a lot of information that we've got here about what does good working from home look like. Interestingly, before the crisis, we were having discussion with members who were driving this agenda anyway. So 5-6 years ago, you might have said, well, in the recruitment sector, are we good at flexible working? Maybe not. And we've definitely seen that change, partly driven through an expectation of workers that people want to work flexibly, etc. So I think we were starting from a point of quite a strong point anyway. So 81% voted. That's fantastic. We'll close that poll now. So the vast majority are in that camp. So the plans are in place if we need to, and then hopefully one, but I think it's likely to come to that, but not yet implemented. 12% of you are saying we're already doing this, and 23% are not planning any significant change of working. So again, if you can colour that for us, that would be interesting. So any feedback about why you're not planning to change it? Are you doing anything? Are you doing other things to address some of the concerns, which is different from working from home? There are other approaches that you can take. So any particular challenge around working from home, management challenge that creates, etc. We're keen to get your views on that, because that might be an area that we provide additional guidance support for members on through the hub that we created earlier this week. So thanks again for that feedback. Next question. This is an interesting one, Sophie. Perhaps you can help frame this one, but let me just set the tone for the actual question. What percentage of the temporary work, and we'll include contractors in this, temporary work or contract placements, can be done from home? So this is a could question, not necessarily that's happening now. When we think about the provision of temporary workers, contractors, what percentage roughly, and this is really just a broad sense check, could actually be done from home if you had to? So Sophie, do you want to give a bit of context to this and why we think this would be an interesting question for us to get an answer to?
Yeah, I think, obviously there's a lot of work that we know temporary workers do that we don't see could be, but we would want to get an idea of how much can be. So whether that is some office professional work or in other sectors, or if there are ways that you can advise clients on thinking differently about potentially some of the work that could be done working from home. But we just wanted to get an idea of how many of the contracts that you currently have could be done.
Yeah, and I think this could come into play. So if employers across the country are looking at remote working, in some sectors they say, well, that could apply and should apply equally to the temporary and contract workforce. So we'll close that down. It'd be good to get Lorraine's views on this as well, so if that's a question that's come up at all. But the answer is 43% none, and we do understand in some sectors like care, healthcare, it's an obvious one. Even sort of warehousing and some of those sectors, it's not going to be possible. 33% a few, so less than 20%. 7% saying yes, a significant proportion, and 16% the majority. So that's not bad. So that would be useful actually if you could give us a flavour, and Neil, perhaps keep an eye on that. So examples of the sort of roles that actually you're a temporary contract worker, but they could be done remotely. So Sophie mentioned office professionals. I know some of our members in the technology space, so if you can be an IT contractor, that you could certainly do to some extent remotely. So if you give us a flavour for that, that's a really interesting message. So we recognise that it does depend very much on the sector. Construction, again, that's going to be hard to to do remotely. Okay, a few of us coming in. Auditors, yeah. Supply teachers, again, that's going to be a difficult one. Yeah, so education, again, that's one of the sectors where obviously it's impossible really to work from home unless we're incredibly innovative in our delivery models. Okay, any views on that, Lorraine?
I mean, I think it's important that where clients may be implementing flexible working arrangements for their staff, that they don't overlook temps who are being supplied to them if they've still got a need for that function to be carried out. Not surprised to see that it can be done in the IT sector. Even without this, we take a lot of questions at times that relate to IT contractors who are working in other countries and working remotely for clients. So that's not too much of a surprise.
Great. No, that's been really useful feedback. So again, keep giving us the examples, but that's provided a useful bedrock for some of our messages around flexible working and the benefits of it, etc. Third section now, we go into perhaps some of the more practical areas. So this is if this was a shampoo advert, it would be this is the science bit. But we're reviewing the guidance, and this is where we're focused on some of the questions we'll be getting to the legal helpline, in particular around SSP.
Yeah, so I just thought I'd just do a bit of a recap on what the current provisions are relating to SSP, and then obviously we've got the changes that have been brought in or will be brought in through the budget announcement. So statutory sick pay is payable to employees. Employees also include what we call employed earners, and those are people who pay Class 1 national insurance contributions. So that's where agency workers have an entitlement, even if they're engaged on a contract for services. It's paid to anyone who is actually sick, so they're not able to work due to sickness. But there are already provisions that allow SSP to be paid to people who, whilst not sick, could be abstaining from work because they've been directed to do so under legislation, and that's in relation to a disease which could impact on public health. The current rates of SSP are £94.25 per week, but that is going up in April to £95.85. And currently, and I stress currently because this is one of the changes that's coming in, it's only paid from the fourth qualifying day. The person has to have minimum earnings of £118 per week. Again, that's going up to £120 in April, and employees are required to notify their employer that they are off sick. And generally, they are required to provide evidence of their incapacity, which typically would be a self-certificate for the first 7 days and then a fit note. But obviously, in relation to coronavirus, the advice for individuals from the outset has been to avoid going to GP surgeries for obvious reasons. So employers have already been asked to be flexible around the evidence that would otherwise be required, and accepting a late evidence is generally what employers are being encouraged to do. In terms of the changes that are coming in relation to evidence, one of the announcements from the budget report is that a new system will be brought in that will allow NHS 111 to issue evidence of incapacity, so people won't need to go to the doctor's surgery. So we haven't got the details of exactly when that will be brought in. Again, that's one of the things that Sophie and our policy team have been trying to get some detail on. And as soon as we have that, we will obviously be able to share that with members.
So we've got some questions here. I don't know if you want to take some questions now, or so how long does someone need to be earning £118 a week for claim SSP?
Okay, so basically statutory sick pay is due to someone from day one of their employment. So as long as someone has done some work, they would be eligible. And if their earnings are £118 a week or £120 from April, then they would be eligible.
Yeah. Okay. There's one here, Sophie, from Brian, actually saying about timing for the definition of the 250 workers. So again, we're pushing that as hard as we can. There's no guarantee when we'll get the information, but
yeah, and we're kind of suggesting to the government that rather than focusing on the 250, they could use a different definition of what a small company, how a small company is defined. So from the Companies Act, but we don't know when we will see that draft legislation. The government haven't said. They've said that in the first instance we can expect a Q&A, and we are following this webinar. We're going to send more questions to them, but they are drafting that Q&A as we speak.
good. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, back to the budget announcement. As probably most of you have heard, the government has set out in the budget report that they're going to extend statutory sick pay to individuals who can't work because they've been advised to self-isolate. The budget report also makes a reference to this being extended to people who are caring for someone within their household who are displaying signs or symptoms of coronavirus and therefore been told to self-isolate.
There was some question there. Is that in force from now, or do we know when that will be applicable from?
No. So again, the announcements that came out of the budget, they're going to have to be brought in by way of legislation. And we do know that there's going to be a new coronavirus or COVID-19 bill that needs to be put before Parliament, and we expect the details to be set out in that bill and any supporting regulations. So the timings are still up in the air at the moment.
Yeah, so we haven't seen the draft bill yet. We're expecting that it will be published in the next sort of week or so, but it is quite complex legislation. There was actually a consultation that we did on this back in November, so the government have know the kind of complexities in our sector. Because we've responded to that back in November, but we are continuing to push on these issues that we need clarity on, and we think should take into account the specific kind of impact on the sector.
Yeah, getting quite a lot of questions on SSP, so we'll perhaps try and come to one or two of them. Certainly, educations, there's definitely a lot of questions in that sort of space. One question that just came up, which was raised at a recent member meeting, actually, which is anyone passing the bill for SSP on to clients and our clients accepting it? So I think it was our meeting in Birmingham, a few members were doing that, saying we will not supply the staff to you until we get some recognition for that. So that's something that's come up, Lorraine.
Yeah, that's been another common question. I mean, in terms of the ability to pass the SSP costs on to your client, that's really going to be determined by your contract terms. There is a provision in the REC template terms that allows for that, but of course there is the practicality of whether clients will accept it. And I think given the sheer volume of the costs, it may not be something, or it's likely to be something that clients are going to be reluctant to do. It may be that if you've got, one or two very long-term workers in just on individual situations, that there may be a bit more flexibility in terms of what clients are likely to be prepared to accept. But I think where you've got large volumes of workers, there likely to be issues with that.
A specific question in education, so I don't know if we have a complete answer to this, but again, that's one of the challenges, is if schools close for 2 or more weeks, are the supply teachers or the temp workers entitled to any pay? So that's something we might have to come to in the next few weeks.
I mean, it is a big question, and I have just done an update for our coronavirus guidance, which hopefully will be put on the website later today. But the education sector have sent a lot of questions in this about school closures. Obviously, there are concerns about that. One of the questions we get is whether sick pay needs to be paid to supply teachers if schools close. Statutory sick pay, even with the extension of the entitlement for coronavirus, isn't to be paid to people because the school has closed. So the closure by the school won't give rise to statutory sick pay for supply teachers. I think one of the other questions that comes in is whether supply teachers as agency workers would be entitled to any other additional payment under the agency workers regulations if they've completed the 12-week qualifying period. And this is something we have looked at in quite a bit of detail. Just in reference to the definition of pay and where there is an entitlement to parity, it wouldn't include periods where agency workers aren't working. And there was quite a prominent case from last year where the Court of Appeal made it quite clear that agency workers under the AWR aren't entitled to demand, if you like, the same amount of working time as the staff of the clients that they're supplied to. So we don't see that there's any process under the AWR where agency workers who are supply teachers would be entitled to continue to be paid when schools are closed. It will come down to what's in the contract, because if they've got assignments, what notice do they need to be given to terminate? So there may be a contractual issue, but not an SSP or an AWR issue.
And a few, just to close off, just a few real practical questions on the basics around SSP. One is around, how do I calculate SSP? Is there a practical guide somewhere?
So the rates for SSP are fixed on a weekly amount. So as I said, currently £94.25. And it's paid based on how many qualifying days someone has. So if someone has 5 qualifying days in a week because they work 5 days a week, if they're off for 2 of those days, then they would get 2/5 of the £94.25. Quite often, agency workers only have 1 qualifying day identified in the contract if they're working sporadic weeks, and that means if they are off on that 1 qualifying day, then they would get the full weekly amount. But there are details, and there is an SSP calculator on the gov.uk website under the SSP sections.
Yeah.
And there's a question here on, can you specifically clarify that the employer pays the SSP and not the government? And this is one thing that has been announced in the government, by the government at the budget, that they will pay the SSP for employers with fewer than 250 employees. And this is where the question of the temp workforce comes into question from our point of view.
Yeah. So yes, as you can see on the slide there, the way that this will work is that the government will refund employers where SSP has been paid to employees who have taken time of absence because they've had to self-isolate. And this is the provision that only applies to employers with 250 or fewer employees. Obviously, we're looking to get clarification on that definition of employees.
Okay, good. So I think we'll move on through the presentation, but keep the questions coming, and at the end we'll wrap up as many as we can. Some of the similar questions to education is coming out in other sectors. So if you close an office or close a factory, what happens there? So we'll come to that one after. But Lorraine? Yeah,
so just the other change, and this was before the budget, that the Prime Minister announced that SSP, instead of being payable from the 4th qualifying day, will be payable from the 1st day of sickness absence where the absence is related to coronavirus and someone having to self-isolate. And just on the point of timings, the Secretary of State for Health, Matt Hancock, did announce on the 11th of March that the piece of legislation that will bring this all in, would be presented to Parliament, quote there, before next week. But obviously we're still looking for details on that. So we have taken quite a few questions that have come in through the poll. Some of the other questions that we have had, although we may go back to more of the poll questions, I've tackled really what happens in relation to SSP and the timings. I think one other question here, just at the bottom of this, is about umbrella company workers. And who is responsible for paying SSP if temps are working through an umbrella company. SSP is always due from the employer. So if you've got workers working through an umbrella company, but the umbrella company has employed those workers, they've got a contract of employment with the umbrella company, it is the umbrella company that is responsible for paying SSP. Sometimes we hear references to umbrella companies where there's merely an outsourced payroll function that's being provided, but the agency still is the party that engages the workers. And if that's the case, it would be the agency that's responsible. So it's really who the temporary workers are employed by, and it's that employer who's responsible for paying SSP.
Right, thank you. And there's quite a lot of sector-specific questions coming up, so we might not be able to get to all of these, but it's worth mentioning that one of the avenues for us to take forward is through the different sector groups. So we've got webinars coming up, certainly in healthcare there's a webinar coming up, other sectors as well. So we will be having a sort of sector-specific approach to some of these questions and issues as well. Going forward.
I suppose just one question on the sectors. So in the healthcare and education sectors, clearly agencies are required to do certain compliance checks. If an agency office has to close down, staff are sent home, presumably the obligation, the compliance checks still have to be done, face-to-face interviews and such like. There's no provision at the minute to.
Yeah, so for members in the education sector, as an REC requirement, there is a need to do face-to-face interviews. As I understand, our compliance team are looking at that requirement, and they're reviewing it in conjunction with CCS, just trying to link up with what the provisions are under the supply teacher framework. But that's being currently reviewed, yes. And I think communication will be sent to members in that sector. Yeah,
I think that's a good point. So just to conclude, Lorraine, do you want to talk about our hub here?
Yeah, so we have brought all of the information together just in one central place on our website. We will be keeping this updated. It's the coronavirus hub, so all of the updates, any further information we have, particularly any details when we get information about the bill, will all be in one space. So please come to the coronavirus hub if you need any further information.
Yeah, and as well as the questions, it's really useful to receive feedback from what's happening on the ground. So I think there was one from a member saying about how they're dealing with clients and refusing to supply unless there's some guarantees put in place.
Yeah, guarantees with the end client on basically a sick pay agreement. So it would be interesting to know if others are speaking to their clients about SSP arrangements in that way, bring it into contracts.
Yeah. So any stories like that and how clients are responding as well as workers is really useful for us to take stock of. So final section. So in the last 5-6 minutes, do keep sending the questions. We'll come to the last few at the end of the session. But looking ahead and to help us do that, just the final couple of poll questions. It's been really great to get your views on a lot of the issues. And this is just the one sense check looking ahead. So your views about how will the current crisis impact on hiring activities. And I'm talking about both temp, contract, as well as perm here, but in the short term. So what's your view of the market, what it means in the short term? Will it have a major adverse impact? Will it have some impact, but actually it's manageable, no real impact? Or will it actually increase demand for staff? And again, the feedback from a number of our members on the policy committee was more upbeat than we would have thought, actually. So just interesting on this, not super scientific, but just to get a sense check about where you are in terms of the market in the short term. So again, we don't know what's going to happen in the mid to long term, but in the short term, what are we thinking? So it'd be good to get your views on that. And again, through Report on Jobs, through Jobs Outlook, that will give us a monthly tracker about what's happening in the sector, including business confidence, etc. So again, keep an eye out for those reports that come out every single month. So 72% of you have voted. So response rate's been a near record, Temi, I think. Is that right? Yeah. So we're really pleased on that. Thanks a lot for responding to the polls in such large numbers. And again, we're over the 80% mark, which is fantastic. And I think we'll just close that poll there. So a bit of a mix on that one. 35% are saying we'll have a major adverse impact, so that's significant, some impact. So the vast majority are saying yes, inevitably this is going to have some impact. 11% of you are saying no real impact, or actually it would increase demand for staff. So be good to that 8%. So what areas are you saying actually that's going to increase demand? So we know obviously healthcare, I think life sciences has been one. Some of the logistics sectors, that's certainly been an upside. Again, interested to get your view. What's the worst affected? So particular roles where it's really been massively impacted, but that gives us a good sense check of where we are. And this is the final poll question, and this is one that will help us in some of our work here at the REC. So going forward, what additional practical support and services would be most useful? And on this one, you can choose 3 answers. And again, it gives us a bit of a view. If there's things you'd like which are not on this list, do put that into the box. So is it more around guidance on managing working from home arrangements, so the practicalities of remote working, etc.? Would that be useful? Peer-to-peer exchanges, again, probably virtual rather than in person at the current time, but peer-to-peer exchange with other industry leaders around managing the crisis, would that be the most useful guidance service? Sector-specific information, we've talked quite a lot about the sectors. Would that be up there? Practical guides on managing the business through difficult times. We've done this in the past around economic downturns, so is that something that you'd find useful? Or virtual learning tools that staff can use to boost skills? And the feedback from some of the member meetings was actually this is a good time if things are a little bit quieter, maybe to radically upskill our workforce at a time when a lot of our members are looking to slightly change the way they interact with clients, having a more strategic relationship, etc. Is this time actually a good time to use virtual learning tools to upskill the workforce? So that was certainly an interesting theme from recent meetings. So on this one, you can choose 3. 76% have voted already.
And if you are choosing the sector-specific information, if you could also put in the box which sector you're kind of thinking about, that would be helpful.
Yeah, spot on. And every single sector webinar meeting we'll do, obviously this will be front of mind. Even the regional meetings we've been doing, we've been having a good open discussion about how people are working in the current environment and meeting the current challenges. So we'll close that poll now. Again, 80%, fantastic response rate. Again, a good mix, but 51% saying practical guidance on managing work from home arrangements. Again, interesting. So that's certainly something we can look to collate, etc. Peer-to-peer exchanges. So we'd have to think how we do that. But there is definitely something. So when we have kept on with some of the physical meetings, people have come away saying that was really, really useful to exchange views with my peers in terms of how they're dealing with that going forward. 72% sector-specific information high up there, and practical guides on managing the business through these difficult times. And again, there's templates we've got, there's things we've done in the past, all very practical based on what people have done in the past. So again, trying to make this really concrete and real. So practical guides, again, we'll take that away and that will inform some of our support work over the coming weeks and months. So thank you very much for those poll questions. Final couple of slides now from me, and then we'll perhaps finish just answering a couple of extra questions before we wrap up. One of the things we will be doing is using our network here at the REC. So we've got really good connection, obviously, the CBI, CIPD, IPSA representing individual contractors, so regularly exchanging views with those organisations. The CBI work's giving us a good insight into what other business bodies are doing, including in the sectors. So Sophie, I know you're at a recent meeting this week, I think, at the CBI of other trade bodies, and I think there the mood was perhaps similar to ours, which is recognising in the short term there is an obvious impact.
Yes, and trying to work out as well what the impact is on supply chains for the other countries that are also affected, and when that will hit the UK as well. Yeah.
If you are working in other countries, so as you probably know, we're members of the World Employment Confederation, which brings together nearly 50 representative bodies like REC, but dotted all around the world. So if you're interested in how the industry's faring in other countries, let us know. We've also got pretty good links with the International Labour Organization. So that global element is a big part of our work now at the REC. So if you're interested in any of that, drop us a little note. Sophie mentioned all the work with government. The Good Recruit Collective, which is the rebrand of the Good Recruit campaign, which is our segue into the client community. Over 500 leading employers have signed up to that. That's giving us quite a good insight into what leading employers are doing. And again, we'll be sharing some of that. And the other logo is Krona. So we do work with Krona, who provide support to our members. They'll be producing some guides as well, and we'll see if we can use that to further help members.
Yes, I mean, obviously members do have access to Krona for some additional support, sometimes things that are beyond what we can cover on the legal helpline, so that's a valuable resource.
Great. Okay, so that will be coming at you and be forming part of the package. We spent quite a lot of time talking about sector specific. Here's just 2 examples of some of the sector specific guidance. This one's in transport and in health and social care, so we'll continue to drive that through the different sector groups over the coming weeks and months. Okay. On the regional front, as you probably know, we're driving a lot of regional activity here at the REC. One of those is the Future Recruitment Forums we're running with LinkedIn, which has been up and down the country. There's a white paper on that. We're using those. So is there a particular focus on regions? So linked to the sectors. Some sectors will be much stronger, again, in particular regions. So using some of that regional work, again, will continue. We are still planning to run a meeting in Cambridge. We'll take stock whether we make that a virtual meeting next week. We'll see. But at the moment, that's still a physical meeting as part of that series. And again, that's been quite a useful way of exchanging views with members, and we'll continue to use that regional approach as well as the sector one to gauge the views of members and provide the best information that we can. So we'll continue on that. Final questions and comments, Lorraine. I think there was a couple you wanted to touch on before we wrap up.
Yeah, and this isn't specific to coronavirus, but one question that has come in is basically reminding us, the RC, not to forget some of the other work that we're doing. So there is a question here about IR35 documents, the key information document, written statement of particulars, all of these changes which are coming into force in April. And I know coronavirus has knocked everyone a little bit for six, but it's just to say that we have released a lot of our template documents, the written statement of particulars, the REC template key information document, for IR35, the status determination statement, is all of these documents on our website. So please have a look at the legal resources tab. We've got a treasure map document,
Yes,
which sets out all of the documents that we have released and date for the remaining documents.
okay, that's great. And again, in some of the follow-up, we'll send the link back to the hub and all the information that's out there. Anything, Sophie, coming up on the message board there we want to pick up? I think that was a good point there around sort of, obviously there's lots of other activities happening in the current time and we won't lose sight of that for sure. So more question about contracts, quite a lot about plugging into some of the sector discussions. So again, we've got a slide with some of the meetings coming up just as a final one. Quite a lot again around the practicalities around SSP, which we've touched on, and there's lots of information on the hub around that. Okay. So I think we'll conclude now. So we've overrun by 5 minutes, but again, so many questions coming at us. I think that's perhaps to be expected. These are just some of the forthcoming meetings that we've got. So many of these will now be webinars, but this is just a good opportunity and a bit of a snapshot of some of the events that we have got coming forward that some of you have been asking about, in particular around the healthcare. That's the one in April, 22nd of April, that's scheduled to take place. So we'll continue to reflect on the feedback and make sure that we use these meetings to feed in. If you found it useful today, there's no reason we can't do more of these and perhaps do it as a regular webinar. We could plug it into some of the other ones we're doing anyway, but if specific ones on the coronavirus, if people think that would be useful, we'll get your feedback and we're more than happy to put that in the agenda going forward. So again, you'll get these slides with some of these dates on, as well as some of the other meetings coming forward. Conscious of time, so thank you a lot for listening. Perhaps the final reflection from myself is, it's a bit of a cliche, but I think it's true, is we're always remembered for how we deal with things in a crisis, aren't we? And that holds true whether you're a professional body, whether you're a recruitment business, or whether you're the recruitment industry as a whole. So the way as an industry we come together, work with clients, work with candidates, work with governments, etc., will be a really big test for us, of course, but actually is a real opportunity to show what we're all about. And again, the feedback we've had today, some really good examples of our members going the extra mile and doing some great stuff for workers, for their clients, etc. That's been really great to see. So thanks a lot for listening. We'll be back in touch. Anything else, guys?
Yeah, I think just really to say, obviously, as soon as we get updates on the legislation, we will update all of our information and continue to support our members.
Great, thanks a lot. So thanks a lot, Sophie, Lorraine, Neil. Thanks, Temi, for organising, and thank you guys for coming in on such large numbers in such a short space of time, and for responding to the polls, which gives us a really good insight. So thanks a lot for that. Have a good weekend, and we'll be in touch soon. Bye-bye.